It's good to have an opportunity to share this evening just different things of what God is doing. And we have a good amount of time, but the time goes really fast, and there's lots of things to share. For 4.5 years, we were in Brazil on our first term, and there's a lot of specific details. One thing I forgot to mention this morning, we do have a new prayer card if you didn't see that on the table, so please take a new prayer card. The last one that we sent to you all has both Andrew and Zachary, but of course we added Levi since then, so this is an updated picture. Of course, now the picture is a year old, so the boys are a little taller, a little bigger. We as adults don't change it as quickly, so Sarah and I look very much the same. But feel free to take a prayer card and pray for us. If you don't get our email updates, our email is on the back, the Ruleys at Gmail. You can send me an email. Some of the things I'll be sharing tonight will be part of the update that I'll be sending out in the next week or so. The next prayer letter, so you'll be a little more in the know earlier than most of our supporters. We also have a Facebook page called Northeast Noticias. If you're interested, we're not extremely good at Facebook. It's a necessary evil, right, to some of us, but it is a good thing to share some pictures and some different things about what's going on in our family and our ministry. And as we go back to Brazil, we hope to put some more things up from the church and from the ministry in Brazil. So if you're interested, you can check that out. That's on the back of the card. But for sure, take a prayer card, and we appreciate your prayers, and it'd be nice to have an updated picture of us on here. This evening, we're going to watch a video. It's about 9 minutes long, and it's a summation of our first term. We moved to Brazil in 2015, and during that 4.5 years of our first term, which is a little longer than normal for most missionaries, God opened a lot of unique opportunities for us to learn the language, to learn the culture, to be involved in the ministry in Northeast Brazil, and then also to start planning a church where we were at for 2 years in Cajazeiras. When we fly back to Brazil on November 11th, we'll be returning to the city of Cajazeiras, where we left our house with all our stuff, and so that's where we're returning. When we finish watching the video, I'll give you an update on specifically what's happening, and then we'll talk a little bit more, expand on some of the things that we did in our ministry, and also give you an opportunity to ask some questions. So we'll go ahead and show the video at this time.
Deep in the interior of Northeast Brazil, God is doing a great work. For more than 70 years, God has used faithful missionaries from Baptist Mid-Missions to share the gospel, plant churches, and train leaders who have had an impact throughout Brazil and around the world. Despite these advancements, Northeast Brazil, though the fastest-growing region of Brazil, is still the least evangelized. Unlike the temperate coastal areas, the interior of Northeast Brazil, known as the Sertão, is hot and dry, known for its cyclical droughts. The physical climate mirrors the spiritual climate, where devout religious practice has done little to combat the constant plague of depression, alcoholism, drug abuse, and domestic problems. We are the Ruley family: Daniel, Sarah, Andrew, Zachary, and Levi, and we are thankful that God has called our family to bring the living water of God's Word to the spiritually dry Sertão of Northeast Brazil.
On July 10th, 2015, after 5 years of raising support, our family arrived in Brazil to begin our first term. We moved to the city of Juazeiro do Norte, Ceará, which is strategically located in the center of Northeast Brazil. For the next 2.5 years, Juazeiro became the hub for learning Portuguese and adapting to the culture of the Northeast. After 1 month, we began studying with 2 teachers, Pastor Francimar and Norma, who gave us personal lessons 3 hours a day, 4 days a week for a year. While as adults, we struggled and studied hard to learn the language, Andrew and Zachary picked up the language quickly by simply playing with children at the school where we studied. Our studies also included field trips to purchase items, teaching the school kids American sports and baking, and lots of personal conversation. We are so thankful for our teachers who worked hard to make sure that we spoke correctly and accurately.
One of the blessings of living in Juazeiro was the many opportunities to minister and build relationships. We live close to our Baptist seminary and were able to build lasting relationships with families studying for the ministry. At the end of our first year in Brazil, I was invited to serve as co-pastor of Igreja Batista da Fé in Juazeiro. This gave me many opportunities to preach, teach the youth group, and learn how ministry functions in Brazil. One of the highlights was the chance to teach the baptism class and eventually baptize 7 individuals who we have continued to see grow in their service for Christ. Sarah also had opportunities to teach the children's Wednesday night class and speak for a few ladies' events. We are very thankful for Pastor Márcio and Juliana, who were very gracious and patient with us in giving us these opportunities to serve in the church while we were still in the beginning stages of learning the language.
During our time in Juazeiro, we were influenced by various missionary colleagues, especially our mentors, Bill and Dorothy Kettlewell. We met regularly for prayer meetings and learned a lot from these veteran missionaries. During our first term, the majority of our colleagues retired, but we were thankful for the brief time we had to serve together and learn from their experience. Living in Juazeiro also gave us opportunities to participate in pastors' fellowships, special conferences, and even an area-wide evangelistic crusade. We enjoyed visits from both our parents and our pastor. It was a blessing to show them the sites where we live and to involve them in ministry while they were there with us. Daniel became connected with Camp Peniel in Iguatu, a city about 2 hours from Juazeiro. He had been privileged to serve as an advisor to the camp and for the past 3 summers to work as camp counselor and organizer for Kids Camp. Camp has been a wonderful opportunity to invest in the lives of our children. After 2 years in Brazil, we began praying that God would give us clarity as to where He would want us to serve next.
While we were praying for guidance, Primeira Igreja Batista Regular in Iguatu invited us to join with them in planting a church in Cajazeiras, Paraíba, where a couple from their church was already living. This city is located 2 hours from Juazeiro, and though significantly smaller, is an education center with 2 federal universities and various other academic institutions. After much prayer and several survey trips, we believed it was God's will for our family to help begin this work. In January of 2018, God moved our family deeper into the Sertão to plant a church in Cajazeiras. When we moved, we only knew William and Raquel, the couple from Iguatu. This wonderful couple has been a huge blessing in beginning this church plant. Shortly after arriving, we met Cicero, a believer who was searching for a home church. His wife Kellyanne was unsaved, but as we developed a relationship with their family, it was exciting to see the barriers to the gospel begin to weaken. After almost a year of weekly Bible studies, Kellyanne accepted Christ as her Savior. It was my privilege to baptize her just 2 weeks before we left Brazil for our first furlough. Over the last year and a half, God has given us a group of special people who are unified and excited to reach Cajazeiras with the gospel.
While in Cajazeiras, we have had many opportunities to make meaningful connections with people in the community. We were invited to teach English in a local music school, and the boys have made many new friends by playing futebol twice a week. Last summer, we hosted a church from Iowa who held a 2-day English event at the Federal University. While sharing about American holidays and culture, this group was able to clearly present the gospel to many unsaved professors and students. We look forward to continuing to reach out to the many students who study in our city. We also have an opening to hold services in a local rural community where we have been asked to come once a month, though no one in the community is a believer. We look forward to seeing how God will use these open doors as we continue to minister in Cajazeiras.
Another important part of our ministry has been Bible training centers. I was given the task of administering this program, which helps churches train pastors, deacons, and leaders within their local church. I currently administer 15 of these courses and even had the privilege of teaching this class each week in the city of Iguatu. 4 classes have successfully completed the course, and several men have been called to the ministry as a result. Working with Bible training centers opened the door for me to travel to Mozambique to help one of our Brazilian missionaries train national pastors. After 4 days of basic Bible teaching, we have been invited to return on a regular basis to help train pastors in Mozambique. This unexpected invitation will provide many challenges, but we are grateful for one more opportunity to train leaders to serve Christ's church. We appreciate your continued prayers for Northeast Brazil, that God will continue to open hearts in a dry land where many are in need of living water that only salvation in Jesus Christ brings. There are still many towns and cities in the Sertão that are desperately in need of someone to clearly share the gospel of Christ. Pray for the church plant in Cajazeiras, that souls will be saved, and God will establish His church that will have an impact on the surrounding Sertão for God's glory.
So there's a lot of information in that video, and I don't know about you, but every time I watch that video, I'm in some ways overwhelmed with all of the opportunities, and I think there's actually a lot of things to talk about too. There's a lot of things to share with regard to our ministry, and a lot of exciting things. In fact, when we came back to the States, we were worn out from being out of the country for 4.5 years, and with so many opportunities coming our way, there was just a lot of things going on, and we were definitely tired. So coming back to the States for furlough was a good thing for us, something that most pastors can't do, get away from your ministry for a while and be able to refocus while we were still ministering here in the States, sharing updates. And for us, COVID was actually a blessing because we weren't able to be in churches for 2 months, and that really gave us an opportunity to get some good rest and really to refocus, to sharpen ourselves and prepare ourselves for going back to Brazil. So there are lots of opportunities in Northeast Brazil and even from Northeast Brazil in the country of Brazil and also around the world. And it's been good for us to realize our limitations, but also to realize that there are lots of opportunities and ministries that we can share and be a part of. One thing that's a blessing for us and maybe unique for a lot of missionaries, we are obviously planting a church and we are building ministry, but we're also in the capacity that we can cooperate and participate in ministry that's already established. And that's a huge blessing. There are different phases of missionary work, just like there are different phases of the church. And we're not doing pioneer work exclusively. Yes, we are planting a church in a city that needs a church plant, and we're working by ourselves. In some ways, in capacity, we only have one missionary colleague family that is 2 hours away from us. And so in some ways, we're on our own, but we also are able to partner with pastors that live within a couple-hour radius of us. We do have a Bible college student that helps us, and so we have those partnerships that we're able to work with. So that's been a blessing. Just a brief update on our church plant, which is our primary ministry. Our church is doing okay. We had not been able to hold services since the middle of March when COVID hit in the United States. It also hit Brazil, and so we weren't able to hold services. Part of that was because the restrictions were much tighter in Brazil initially. The lack of good medical care is a serious thing. Northeast Brazil, as I'll talk about in a minute, it's kind of the middle of nowhere. It's the country. It's actually kind of, it can be a scary place to be, as I mentioned this morning, physically, but also the lack of basic medical care and services exists. Not as serious as Bolivia, as Mark was telling me. It's not as primitive as that, but there definitely are medical concerns. We know people who died from lack of basic medical care in several instances while we were in Brazil. And so there is much greater concern for COVID. And because of that, people stayed indoors. They used masks. There was a concern to come back and do public things. Even schooling is all being done online through the rest of the year, and it may be extended into next year. Not exactly sure how that will work. So there is a lot more concern. And so we weren't able to hold services. We also weren't able to have someone consistently in the city to work in the church. Diego, our Bible college student, was studying remotely, but he was studying in Juazeiro, where the seminary is, and he wasn't able to travel back and forth for quite a while because he had to cross the border. It was a 3-hour trip packed in a little teeny van. It really wasn't a wise thing for him to come back and forth for his health and for the health of our church. So we were able eventually in August to get him to be able to live in Cajazeiras in our house. So he's been living in our house since then. And so at the beginning of August, we began holding services. So they're actually they should be in their service right now. We have an evening service in Brazil. And so they're holding a regular evening service. He is there living in our house, and he'll be there until we get back in just a few weeks. So we're thankful for that opportunity to reopen services. Now, our numbers have been very down. We've had less than 10 people attending our services. We were getting somewhere between 20 to 30 people consistently before we left. So some of that is just due to the people not coming, the difficulty of being able to do visits. So we're going to have to regather our people once we get back. But they're still active in our WhatsApp group for our church. We're still able to communicate with them. Some of them have small children, and so the difficulty of coming to church without a children's class is hard, knowing that we'll come back and work with kids and be sensitive to their needs. I'm not concerned that our regular people will come back to the church, but we just have some rebuilding to do once we get back. Also, it's been difficult to have visitors, but consistently we would have visitors most services. In fact, when we started the church, we had more visitors, more unsaved people consistently attending than believers for a while, which was a pretty neat thing, and they would come consistently. So there are numerous people that we're working with that haven't come back because of COVID, but we still have contact with. We're praying for their salvation. And so we're praying that as we get back, we'll be able to reach out to them. So people are doing well. We're communicating with them. There's a boy, Miguel, and every week he's sending these sweet messages to Sarah, telling Sarah that he wants her to come back and he misses her a lot. He has saudades, which means a desire for her to come back, a strong he's missing her very strongly, I guess is the best way to say it. So we're thankful that our church is doing okay and that we'll be able to continue our services once we get back. We're thankful as well, while we were traveling, we mentioned the need for raising money to purchase a piece of property. We've been renting a facility, and we've already in our second facility, because of difficulties with the landlord and the space, the location, we have a decent facility, but we'd really like to have our own location. And during our furlough, God provided those funds for us to be able to purchase a piece of property. And so we hope as we go back to have a piece of property and be able to create some more stability, to have some more room for us to grow the ministry. And I'll say a little bit more about that in just a minute. But that's kind of an update of our church, and we're excited to go back and see what God's going to do. Of course, this is our family. You've seen a picture of them before. Hopefully you've talked to the boys a little bit. Levi was born, I always like to say this at least, Levi, of course, was born in Brazil, so he is a Brazilian. The other boys have adapted very well to the culture. They speak Portuguese. They enjoy being in Brazil. They enjoy playing football with their friends. They're all looking forward to going back to Brazil, which is a good thing. And Sarah as well did very well learning the language. People normally say that she speaks Portuguese better than me, and I say it's probably because I speak a lot more, so I make more mistakes. I don't know. But she was able to learn the language well. Many missionary wives, because of domestic responsibilities and other things, aren't able to study the language as well. But we were able to study it together. Sarah has quite a desire to communicate with people, and so she's done very well, including having opportunities to speak to ladies. They asked her to speak for International Women's Day one time a few years ago, and she was like, okay. And it was a church out in the country, and we thought, there'll be 20 people. Well, there ended up being 60. All these ladies came out to hear this American speak in the middle of nowhere, and the place was just packed out. I think we had almost 30 kids to take care of, us men, while the ladies were in their meeting. And so Sarah was like, well, I'm just going to share what God has, and if I make a mistake, it's all right. But she did a really good job. And then the next week, she was supposed to be doing a wedding shower for one of our teenagers, and she thought it was going to be 30 or 40 ladies from the church. It ended up being 120 people that came, because it was the entire family of the bride that came. And so she's had the baptism of fire speaking in Portuguese in front of people, but it's been good for her. So thankful how our family can have a ministry together. Levi being born in Brazil allowed us to get our permanent residency. And so even though there have been COVID restrictions, there are no longer specific COVID restrictions going in and out of Brazil, though it's a high risk, so they're encouraging there not to be travel. We do have the ability to travel back and forth, of course, with masks. There won't be any quarantine requirements on us, and we do have our permanent residency, so we're able to go in and out of Brazil without any difficulty. So we're thankful that those details worked out and we don't have to worry about those things. Just to highlight where we live, these are the states of Northeast Brazil. We live in Cajazeiras, in this state right here, highlight right here, Paraíba right here, and so that's the area that we've been in. Northeast Brazil is a little bit different. Brazil is a very large country, but Northeast Brazil is hot, it's dry. We didn't wear a coat the entire time we were in Brazil, which was really nice, I have to admit. It was a little chilly tonight leaving the hotel, and I was thinking, I don't know if I like this or not. I really, I really like not having to wear a coat. We were out in Arizona. It's really nice out there, isn't it? It's nice to not have to wear a coat. And we didn't, in fact, I didn't even have to wear a suit coat because the culture doesn't require it. So I like to wear suits in the United States, but after 2 more weeks, I won't wear a suit again for a while. Just the way our churches, I wear a shirt and tie as the most dressed up in our ministry. But Northeast Brazil is in some ways known as the country. The country people, the people are simple. They're very hospitable. We're thankful for the opportunities to really reach out to people, to go into their homes, to have personal conversations, to build relationships. Northeast Brazil is the most Roman Catholic region of Brazil, and so we see a lot of idolatry. We see, I forgot to mention, the food is really good though. So if you ever want to come visit us in Northeast Brazil, we eat a lot of steak. I mentioned that this morning. Lots of coffee, lots of fish, beans and rice, lots of good food. But we see a lot of Roman Catholicism. As I said, the Northeast is the most Roman Catholic region of Brazil, so we see a lot of idolatry. I mentioned that this morning. When we lived in Juazeiro do Norte, which was the first city where we lived, we have a Bible college in that city, in that valley area where the city is. We live in the shadow of this statue to Padre Cícero. Padre Cícero was a priest. He's not yet been declared a saint by the Roman Catholic Church, but he's revered as a saint. This coming month, they'll have a pilgrimage to his statue. I think because of COVID, it will probably be limited, but still thousands and thousands of people come to Juazeiro to pray to Padre Cícero, to climb up the mountain, to give gifts to him. Many people have Padre Cícero in their homes, in statue or painting form. And so we see idolatry very clearly in a way that we don't see in the United States. It's an amazing thing to see. But despite that, Roman Catholicism has not met the needs of so many people. There's a lot of broken families. There's a lot of drugs. There's a lot of alcoholism. I talk to so many nominal Roman Catholics who are struggling in their lives, and they say, I just don't know that I can change. They haven't experienced the power of the gospel. So there are lots of needs. As I said in the video, it's the most needy area of Brazil, and there are lots of opportunities to share the gospel. So though Baptist Mid-Missions has had missionaries in Northeast Brazil for close to 75 years, there are so many little towns and villages in our region that need the gospel. Cajazeiras is one of those, and so that's what God has called us to do, to share primarily with Roman Catholicism. As was mentioned as well, Mormonism is very strong in our area, as well as Jehovah's Witnesses. And we actually, in our town, have a piece of property that the Mormons just purchased to build a temple. They send missionaries to our small town. It's only 65,000 people, which is not very big, but they are concentrating on our town. We already have 3 Kingdom Halls in our city, which is significant. So the cults are very strong in our city. It's a university town. It's a central area. And so not only do we see the Catholic Church, we also see the cults, and we see them making strong inroads into our region. So lots of opportunities, lots of needs for spiritual teaching. The basic Bible literacy is very low. In fact, our desire is to work more with children. And I have talked to people, I'll say more about this in a minute, but I've talked to people and they say, you know, if you do a children's program and you teach Bible stories, we'll send our kids. They're from different churches, but most of the churches in our town don't teach children. They don't have those programs to reach out to children, to share with them the Bible. And so there is a thirst for Bible knowledge, and there's a general misunderstanding of Scripture or an inability to study and understand Scripture. So there are lots of needs for teaching and basic discipleship, basic working with individuals. Highlighting the first thing, and these are some pictures from our church. Our primary ministry is church planting. I'll get into in a few minutes some of the other aspects of our ministry, some of the other things that we do, but our primary desire is to see churches established. We have a really neat model in our region of Brazil where most churches are actually planting other churches. Almost every single church that has its own pastor, that is supporting its own pastor, also has a vision to plant another church. So they are normally have at least one, if not more than that, a congregation. It's a satellite church. It may be a handful of people, 15 to 20 people, and they'll send people out on a weekend to do meetings. It may be a congregation in another town where they do have an established pastor, and the church helps support that pastor. So we do already have that vision for church planting, but there are numerous places where there is no gospel preaching church. And so our desire is to fill in those gaps. Cajazeiras was one of those gaps. So after 2.5 years in Northeast Brazil, when we felt burdened to plant a church, God led us to Cajazeiras by various circumstances. I had looked at other areas. I had looked at other opportunities, particularly in the western state of Piauí. It is the hottest state in Brazil. It is the least evangelized state in Brazil. But it was a long way away from other missionaries. It was a long way away from other works. We didn't think that it was wise for us as missionaries to start completely on our own. It's good to have partners, even if they're just Brazilians, believers, and there wasn't enough of a support network for us to be able to plant a church so far away. Time will tell, but I think it was a wise decision for now, but my burden is still thinking about Piauí in the future. But Cajazeiras is a good opportunity because it allows us to fill up the last piece of a chain of churches along a highway. It's a kind of a black hole, not a black hole, and it sounds bad, but a hole where there wasn't a church, a good solid church. There are 2 churches 40 minutes away from us on either side, but no one had been working in the city of Cajazeiras, and so we started that. There's lots of opportunities in our city. We're thankful we moved there because of a couple, William and Raquel, who were living in that city. They have since moved to the state capital in João Pessoa on the coast, so they're no longer in our city. So we're very sad when we go back. They won't be with us anymore. They were a huge blessing and really the vision for us moving to the city and starting the church. But God's added other people to us. We have 3 solid families now that are part of the church. Cicero and his family, his wife Kellyanne got saved, as I mentioned in the video, Flavio and Aquila, and also Clodoaldo and Daniele, and all of them have children. And so they've been part of our church. We've also been able to reach out to youth and particularly college students. In Brazil, we typically have a youth group that is not only teenagers, but is also college students. They normally meet on Saturday nights. And Diego, our helper, our Bible college student, would come on the weekends and he would teach those youth. And he did a really good job. We did a Bible study for about 45 minutes, and then we'd play games. I strongly believe in multifaceted ministry, word-driven, but also the opportunity to have fellowship, to interact, to have that social interaction. And it was really good. We started with 2 college students that we found that were from other churches that were studying in our city. And by the time we had to shut things down at the end of the year, we had 10 college students consistently coming that we were reaching out to from various churches, some of them in the city. And so that's really been a productive ministry. You can't always build a church on college students, but we lose a lot of kids when they go away to study in other towns and they don't have a good church to be invested in. They don't have a church that's equipping them to combat the secularism of the university in which they're in all the time. That's continuously attacking their Christianity. And so it was good for us to reach out to the students in that way. We have an ability to reach out to children. As I mentioned in the video, we got involved in a music school that gives free music lessons. And the professor asked me after a few weeks if we would teach English. And he says, you know, you're an American and you know English, so would you teach English to these kids? And I was like, I mean, I guess I could. I don't really have a curriculum or anything. He's like, really, these kids don't know anything about English, but he's like, it would be really good for them to learn something. But he said, Pastor, I'll give you as much time as you want, 1 hour, 2 hours a week, whatever you want. But he said, I want you to teach them the Bible as part of your English curriculum. And I was like, wow, what in the world? This guy is a amazing man. He's very talented. He plays 36 instruments. He is a devout Roman Catholic, but a very dynamic man. And knowing that I'm not a Catholic, he said, I want you to teach the Bible to these kids. You know, he's thinking these kids are getting themselves in trouble. They have problems with drugs. They have just the typical challenges of teenagers. And I'm thinking, I want to share with them the gospel because that's what they really need. So we have that open door when we go back. We'll see how it works out, but to reach out to kids in the community, teach them English, teach them the scriptures. We also desire to work with children, something that's been challenging for us because we have limited resources, and Sarah taking care of the boys can only do so much. Me taking care of the ministry can only do so much. But we have a good program called Ebeki that was developed in our region for kids. It's kind of like a WANA, but it teaches the kids Bible memorization. It teaches them through scripture. And our desire is to have some sort of a Bible club for the kids where we can bring them in, have some activities, teach them Bible stories every single week, teach them scripture. And as I said, I've already talked to numerous parents in the city, even from other churches, and they've said, hey, we'll send our kids to your church because our kids really need to know the Bible. So kids ministry, I think, is a really important, and no churches in our city have that vision to reach out to children. So that's something that we desire to do when we go back. We have an opportunity just to build relationships with people. I found in our city, if you do door-to-door evangelism, which I know is a difficult thing in the United States, it's a lot more productive. You can literally walk down the street and start inviting people to church, and you'll get rejected. Some people, no, I'm Catholic, or I'm not interested, but it doesn't take very long before people will stop to talk, and they'll actually invite you into their house. They'll give you a cup of cafezinho, a little sugared espresso. So you have to like coffee if you go to Brazil. Strong coffee, sweet coffee. But you go in and you sit down at their table, you talk to them, and I'll tell you, I've gone out visiting and I get stuck for 2 hours talking to somebody. It's not very hard to do. So time is not important. Relationships are important, and that's been a very enjoyable thing for us, just to invest in people, spend time getting to know them. I have numerous people that I'm reaching out to that struggle with alcoholism, that have domestic challenges, that struggle with addictions, that are struggling just with life in general, struggling with depression, which is a huge issue. And we just have an opportunity to build relationships with them, spend time with them. It takes a long time for a person to make a decision for Christ in most cases, but we have those open doors to continue to build those relationships. People aren't afraid of coming and visiting church, even if they're unbelievers, and which is a blessing for us. We even have an opportunity, as I mentioned, to go out into the countryside. There's a small little village called a Sichu, and they invited us to come and do a service out there. And it was just because we knew a lady who had relatives living there, and I was like, you guys aren't Christians. They don't go to church, but they said, we want you to come and do a service. So we went out there we took all our people out there. and we did a service. I found out later that the place that they gave us functions as a bar on the weekends, but they had taken all the posters down. We have done services where they left the posters up, so there's beer signs all around our service, which is interesting. I have a really good blackmail picture of some of our Bible college students doing a service in front of beer signs, but including Diego, our Bible college student, but we did in another city. But we were able to preach the gospel out there, just to sing songs, preach the gospel, and they all came out and they listened to us. And at the end they said, "Oh, that would be great if you could come back." They said, "You're completely different. We have one church in our little village, and they're a Pentecostal church, and all they do is just scream and yell and make lots of noise, and we have no idea what's going on over there. And you guys actually shared with us what the Bible said." And they said, "You can come back anytime you want to." So there are lots of opportunities, more opportunities than we could possibly accomplish, but we have that opportunity to build relationships even outside, just a little bit outside our city. Last thing I want to highlight is the opportunity in the university. I mentioned that we had a group of Americans come and do a English retreat where we did 2 days talking about English to the students. There is an English program in the Federal University, and I found out there's a lot more English-speaking people in Cajazeiras than I knew. When we offered the course, we said, "It's free. We just want you to come and interact with us." And initially they were skeptical. Just like in the States, a public federal university is very secular. You all have heard of Antifa, right? It exists in Brazil, and it is highly supported by many professors, particularly in the university where we're at. And so it was a little intimidating to go as a church and to hold a program. But though we intentionally didn't do a church service, we chose the 4 primary holidays of America as topics for the conversation. So of course, 3 of those are religious. We did 4th of July, then Easter, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. 3 of those are religious. And so we just shared what Americans do with that culturally. And each of the people that came were able to share their personal life, their personal testimony. And at the end, the director of English got up. I shared just about our church, told them that we were available to interact with them. And Fabione got up and he said, "This was a very impactful time for me. I'm really thankful that we could practice our English with real Americans." But he said, "I was most impacted by the personal testimonies, and it made me think about my relationship with God, and it made me realize the importance of my eternal destiny." And he said, "It gave me a lot of things to think about, and hopefully all of you as well." And I was like, wow, that's amazing. This is not a believer, but someone that has been exposed to the gospel in the past. And so we do have some open doors to reach out into the university, and we hope as we go back to reach out a little bit more to the students that are there. So that's our primary ministry. That's what we'll be focusing on when we go back. There are a lot of things that we're doing on top of that, but that's our primary focus when we go back, to build relationships, to hopefully purchase a piece of property, to have a more solid location, and to continue to invest in people and see the church grow through the teaching and discipleship and ministry of our church. I'm backwards here. I want to highlight briefly, we have a lot of ministry partners, as I mentioned. There are a lot of pastors in our region, so we're thankful to have an association of pastors. Our churches are called regular Baptist churches, no association directly with the regular Baptist in the United States, but the term regular Baptist is synonymous with a solid Bible-preaching biblical church, and so we have a good association of pastors. We each have weekly pastors' meetings where we get together, and we pray together, we work together, we have conferences together. And so we're thankful for each one of these pictures represents pastors that I work with in different capacities. Some of them we get together and pray on a monthly basis. Some of them, like the picture down here in the corner, I guess I can highlight some of these. This one down here are some of our colleagues, though all of these colleagues have retired except for Jim and Julie Leonard. So most of those were our American colleagues that retired. But we also have, let's see here. These are men that I work with in a missions capacity. I'll mention more about that. They do mission trips to other countries around the world. These are the pastors that I fellowship on a regular basis. And so we get together every month and pray together, interact together. Those are churches near us. These are my tall pastor friends and my short pastor friend right here. So we like to joke around. It's really been neat. Particularly Pastor Chiago is a real blessing to me. We saw him through seminary, and they've become really close friends. Pastor Araujo has a real passion for teaching his people, and so I've been working with him with Bible training centers, which I'll work on in just a minute. Pastor Elton is a younger pastor, but he lives about 40 minutes from us. He's been a real big colleague and help to me. And then these are the men in our church. Diego, our Bible college student, that's been a big help to us. Claude Waldo, one of our men in our church, and also William. So we have lots of good Brazilian ministry partners that we work with, and we're thankful for each and every one of them. I want to mention another project, another area of our ministry that we have. Through our mission and through the resources that God has allowed us to have, we're able on a regular basis to invest in projects. As I mentioned, there are numerous other churches that are planting other churches. Financial resources are always a challenge, and God has allowed us to invest, never paying for the entire project, but investing seed amounts in helping projects get off the ground and helping finish projects. I was privileged to be a part of this project in a city called Cedro. Through various circumstances, this church plant had been around for a number of years. They lost their piece of property and their building, and so they were meeting in a garage that they had to rent. They had about 15 people. They had a pastor, but they were unable to have their own meeting, and they weren't even able to hold their sign up on their door. So it was in front of their door. So it was a challenge for them. They weren't in a good location in town. They were really struggling. But through various circumstances, they were able to get a piece of property. Through the mission, we were able to give them an amount to start building the walls of the church. And then the next year, we were able to give them a little bit to help them finish the inside. They were able to come up with the rest of the funds. And in September, I preached a dedication of this building. And a church that has been meeting in a small little garage with 15 people now has a building that seats about 150 people. It was packed out on Saturday night when all the other churches could come and be a part of it. On Sunday, when everyone went back to their own churches, we still had the 15 or so people that are part of the church, and then we had more than double that of visitors from the neighborhood. It's a very good location. They had a ton of visitors come in because they were curious about a brand new church building, and so we were pleased to be able to help with a small investment, really only about $3,000 that helped finish them, put them over the top, and be able to dedicate this building. So there are lots of little projects like that we're able to be a part of every single year in helping encourage the church continue their projects, finish doing some building things, renovate pastors' parsonages and other things like that. And so that's a neat part of ministry that we're able to be a part of. I mentioned briefly our Bible training centers. This is a ministry that was passed on to be my mentor, Bill and Dorothy Kettlewell. It's a program that I have the privilege to teach, but mostly to administer. Bible Training Centers is a course that was developed by a pastor for fields or areas where there is no Bible college and where churches desire to train their own leadership. Not everyone can go to Bible college. It's expensive. It's not always easy to do. There's a huge need also to train leadership within the church that aren't pastors, but are qualified as lay leaders, whether it be deacons, whether it be lay leadership within the church. And so I've been able and had the privilege to administer this course to tell pastors how to use it. Really, it's a Bible college level curriculum in that it has all the meat of a Bible institute, but it's done on a personal level. The pastor teaches it to his people. People study through the material. They get together with him normally for about 3 hours during the week. They talk through the curriculum. He opens it up not just for lecture, but also for conversation, for making sure that everyone understands the material and answers their questions. But it also allows him to be mentoring them, having them involved in the church. And we've seen this program be very fruitful in actually calling men to the ministry. So they're serving in their church. They're burdened to serve in the church. They feel like they want more training. They start doing Bible training centers. Sometimes they complete the entire course, which you can take up to 4 years sometimes, depending on how it's done. And God calls them to the ministry as a result. And then they end up going to Bible college and they end up going to ministry. I have numerous young men that have gone into ministry as a result. And there are others that have just stayed faithful, have finished it, and continued to be more effective in their ministry in the church. And so it's been a very neat and effective ministry for us. I also have been able to use it in capacities in other places around the world, including Mozambique. And this is the last thing I'll mention very briefly. Because of Bible training centers, I was able to go to Mozambique. We have missionaries that we send around the world from our part of Northeast Brazil. This is a vision that our churches have. They support the missionaries just like we do here in the United States. And there are numerous countries in the world that speak Portuguese, including Mozambique. And so we have a missionary in Mozambique. His name is Mozinho. He's an African Mozambicano, Mozambique pastor. He married a Brazilian missionary who went over as a single missionary. And we've been able to have a partnership with them. A few years ago, they sent one of their pastors, Jonasi, over to study in our Bible college. I got to know him, and I asked him about Mozambique, and we ended up building a relationship, building a friendship. He told me about the need for training pastors in Mozambique. I spent an entire semester talking with him about Mozambique, showing him how to use the Bible training centers. He went back to Mozambique and has started using the Bible training centers. And I was so impressed by the need over there that I had an opportunity last year to go and visit him to see the opportunities. There are lots of needs to teach and to train in Mozambique. One more opportunity to partner with the pastors. So they've invited us to come and teach. I don't know how possible that is for me to do, but I really would like to do that as much as possible. So we have some neat missions projects, including in Mozambique. Just to highlight one thing here, there's a building up here. Let's see if this will actually go up there. There we go. There's a building up there at the very top, highlighted there. It is called the Bible Institute, Bible Training Center of Mozambique for these churches, but it's not being used because they don't have the teachers and they don't have the resources to train pastors. And so you have a church that needs pastors, needs to train their pastors, but they don't have anyone to do it. So there are lots of needs in Mozambique. And so as we're able to, even though we're planting our church in Cajazeiras, our desire is to help these churches be able to equip their pastors and be able to grow in their knowledge of Scripture. While we're in Mozambique, we gave over 500 Bibles away. We spent an entire week training pastors and leaders, and they were thirsty for more. So we have lots of opportunities over there, and we'll see how God uses that opportunity. The final thing I'll share just our goals and prayer requests, and then if you have, I know we're basically out of time, but if you have a question, I'll let you ask a question. Our desire as we go back is to develop our youth and children's ministries in Cajazeiras, to purchase property in Cajazeiras for our church plan and hopefully build a building at some point in the future. Also that Bible training centers would continue to be effective. And we're also praying that God will bring new people to work with us in Northeast Brazil. There are lots of opportunities. There are lots of needs. There are lots of places that we've pinpointed as places to plant churches. And so it's an exciting field. It's growing. It's neat that we have not only a local ministry, but also a national and international reach as well. And so we're excited what God's doing. We're looking forward to going back and continuing our work in Northeast Brazil. Anyone have any questions briefly? There's a lot of material. I could expand a lot more on that, but I know we don't have a lot of time. So yes.
Ethnic groups there? Is there any one particular group that's more receptive to the gospel than others?
Not necessarily. I found that it's maybe more effective to work with Catholics than to work with those that have already been affected by Protestant denominations, particularly the Charismatics. But really, as far as that goes, the Brazilians are Brazilians. They're a mixture of people. So we don't have, you know how in the United States we have separate people groups a lot more. You know, we have Latinos and we have blacks and we have whites and we separate ourselves a lot more by race and by class and all these kind of things. Brazilians are a lot more mixed. The major divisions that you see are rich and poor, really, when it comes down to it. It seems to be more effective and easy to work with poorer people, working class people than richer people. But it really depends on the background. We're working with a guy who actually owns the gym in our city, and so he's a man of means. But there's definitely a roadblock because there's a Catholicism and there's kind of a status symbol. So if you will, it's more a matter of the background, the religious background, and the situation of the person. So it's a little bit different. Yes, any other questions? It's always going to put you on the spot, right? Lots of things to ask. As I mentioned, Brazil has been a dangerous place to live, but we know that God's in control of the circumstances, and so we continue to trust in Him. And it's been very gratifying to have the partnerships that we have, to have the people that we work with. It's a neat place to be. If you're ever interested in coming and visiting us, we'd love to have you come. You get a taste of lots of different things, and even get some steak, right? If you've ever been to a Brazilian steakhouse, didn't mention this morning, but it cost you $40, $50, $60 here in the States per person. Right now, you can have all-you-can-eat steak for less than $10 at the place where we like to go. They just bring out the steak on skewers and cut it off for you and all that kind of stuff. So there are some perks to coming, but there's also a lot of ministry things to be involved with as well. So we'd love to have you all come if you ever get a chance to visit. It opens up your perspective to see the world, to see what God's doing, and hopefully it's an exciting thing to hear what God's doing. So if there's no more questions, I'll turn it over to Pastor Mark, and we'll go from there.